Right, Assalamu alaikum everybody and welcome back. This will be the last session for the past 8 weeks we have. Today's topic is somehow interesting because it's concerning most of the people in GCC countries. I'm talking about the people, the community, where they can take part in political life. So again, when I say GCC, what I mean by GCC, the 6 countries including Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait. And those 6 countries have been functioning as one organization for the past 40 years, since 1981. So they have been working together as one organization called GCC, as Gulf Cooperation Council. Now, this is something important that we have to understand, that if people in those countries participate politically or not, and how much of participation is being made by the communities. Is it going to be the same from one country to another? We have the scale to look at things. We have to measure in every country how much is political participation, and then we have to look at the individual packages based on survey was conducted, as you can see it now. In this slide number 2, this is a political participation index in the GCC states in 2020. And this was done by PPI GCC. It's an organization called the Gulf House. And this Gulf House was and is based in London in the UK. And its survey in cooperation with one of the think tanks in Washington, DC. They test the political participation in GCC countries. They look at the political participation based on special criteria. They look at the election, they look at the constitution, the minorities, and so on and so forth. We will look at these points one by one. It's important that we have to acknowledge at the beginning that I have quoted everything in this seminar from the Gulf House for Studies. It's a think tank, and it's basically doing this kind of survey from time to time. And this would show us how much participation we have in GCC countries. First of all, you look at the political participation index in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. You'll find it's an annual. This is an annual based survey. It's kind of an index has been done by this Gulf House, and based on scientific elements to monitor the degree of political, social, cultural participation in 6 Gulf countries, as I mentioned before: the Kingdom of Bahrain, Sultanate of Oman, State of Qatar, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. And this is an annual index, so we have some changes happened for the past decades in terms of elections, constitutions, where people can participate, in terms of freedom of speech, where people can exchange. We have some changes happened for the past 3 decades in the Gulf region. So what we have now, based on this index, this fact is presented in this year 2020, but we see how much difference happens for the past few decades. Let's have a look here and see even this kind of index has taken into consideration specialized research publications concerning the measure of degree of political participation, meaning how can we measure, how can I know how much each country in GCC have political participation? It's not an assumption based on spontaneous idea, no. This kind of assumption is based on elements, and those elements, scientific elements, research publications to measure the degree of political participations as on point by point. Even this taken into consideration the conceptual context, such as academic paper, international agreements, covenants, and so on and so forth, and look at the specific conditions. specific conditions of evaluation and evolution of the structure and development of a structure of every country in GCC. This kind of index, and to look at the political participation, take into consideration a major question of pertaining the following points. The main question meaning, why do we have to look at the political participation? What exactly have to examine when we say political participation? We know political participation is one of the elements in the political process. It is important for young people, for women. Now we find most of the research have been done in the Gulf, focus much on youth and women, or sometimes separate youth element and women participation in political life in terms of how much they have achieved in achieving and taking positions, high senior positions in the government or electoral points. So taking into consideration the following point is GCC countries' engagement of their own citizens. This is important. We would like to examine to measure the engagement of the citizens politically in the political process. This is happening that you and me, we could be practicing, engage in political process as citizens in our own countries, in elections, and taking positions in the government, and serving the country, and expressing our thoughts. This kind of engagement, we will look at it. Two, the second point could be examined here is citizens themselves as individual and or group of citizens participation in the decision-making process. Can we? Yes. We have seen this through different mechanisms in many countries, and this is happening as well in the Gulf. Depends on each country, and it depends on the percentage of how many and how often and how in general they do it, how the citizens participate in the decision-making. Decision-making on behalf of the country in terms of social, cultural, diplomacy, social welfare, then how much you as a citizen have been involved in this kind of political process. This is one of the points we'll look at when we look at the political participation in the Gulf, specifically in the GCC countries. In addition to this, we will take into consideration the influence of the state policies and legislation. Influence the state policy. Everything is based on policy and regulations. None of us can go for election without having policy, clear policy, how the election could be done. Is it allowed or not allowed? Is it possible? What kind of election we're going to have? Is it local council or is it legislative council? We'll look at this based on the legal system, and this is happening, and it is taking place in most of Gulf countries. In addition to the aspects of political and social life in political and social life, like how the political and social life can influence such political participation of most people in the Gulf. This study kind of like based on special requirements has done by a team of specialists. They are located mostly in the Gulf. Those specialists collecting the information and measure them. They have criteria and focal points to look at in order to examine really that situation in these countries in terms of political participation. Oh, somebody's asking about the GCC Council will be in coming, Shabir, I think. We're going to look at the question, Shabir, later on after I finish. Yes, GCC Council will be next month, soon. I mean, next month will be in Saudi Arabia. And this is, I think, one of the points can ease the situation between the countries, and lots of hopes that this can ease the tension. And especially when we talk about Qatari crisis, we have some expectation that things are going to be in the right directions, and maybe this could lead to having some reconciliation between the countries, especially between Saudi Arabia and UAE. Sorry, but especially between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Look at this index here. Look at this carefully. This is the overall result out of 1,000 points. 1,000 points. Each country, 6 of them, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, you see the arrow here? Saudi Arabia and UAE. So this is the main index we depend upon. This is the main index, as you can see in the slide here, slide number 6. Overall, a result of political participation after 1,000. So the total is 1,000. Kuwait scored the highest. Kuwait, out of 1,000, scored 535 points. 535 points scored out of 1,000 in the index of political participation. After that, we have Bahrain, 451. Oman is 440. Qatar, 405. UAE, 316. Saudi Arabia, 192. So the political participation in the GCC countries in KSA, Saudi Arabia. They scored 192 points out of 1,000, which is less than 20%. Less than 20% of political participation. Kuwait, it's more than 50. Kuwait, more than 50% political participation, as you can see this in the index. We're going to look at each country and how was this examined. What are the points? What are the criteria for this? The state of Kuwait, number one, you see out of 1,000, scored 535 points based on the following 10 criteria points, elements. One is the constitutional life. In the constitutional life, we will look at 6 countries, the same criteria again, but we will look at the percentage. In the constitutional life, what we mean here is the constitution in the Gulf is made by the head of the state, but most likely it could be held by the Legislative Council, or it could be somehow based on a referendum, public referendum by the community, by the people. So in Saudi Arabia, instead of Kuwait, constitutional life, political participation is 36 out of 50. You see the arrow? It's not 36%, it's 36 out of 50. It's like 72%. People find satisfaction of political participation based on constitutional life, meaning people took part in the constitution, whether through committee, referendum, or through the council, local council. This is in Kuwait. Let's move. I'm going to come back point by point. Constitutional life in Kuwait, 36 out of 50. In Bahrain, 28. In Oman, 17. Oman, one of the lowest, 17, as the constitution in Oman was made by the Sultan himself in 1996 and was amended in 2011 after the political transformations and the changes happened in the Middle East. And there were some protests in Oman, so people were asking for changes. The Sultan gave some power to the Shura Council, Legislative Council, who helped in amending the constitution. So this is why you find 17% Oman 17 out of 50, meaning 34% people participation in the constitution. In Qatar, 24%, almost 50-50, like 50% of the people participated. In Qatar, in fact, the constitution was amended and was voted before based on a referendum by the community, and 96% of the population of Qatar accepted this constitution. In United Arab Emirates, it's 18 out of 50. Saudi Arabia is 10. Saudi Arabia is the lowest. I mean, people do not participate really in the constitutional life, do not participate, whether going to be through a voting system, committees, maybe from a specialist, or even non-legislative council. So Saudi Arabia is the lowest in almost in every single point. Saudi Arabia is the lowest. Let's go back to the second point. We're going to keep going and coming back to the same slide from slide number 7 to slide number 12, from 7 to 12. Come back to Kuwait. Kuwaitan election, general election in Kuwait, I think it's one of the highest. It is the highest. General election in Kuwait, satisfaction of political participation, 104 out of 150. Why? Because in Kuwait, there are some political parties. They have political campaign. They function and they work. So in Kuwait, you're going to find the election and people take part in the election, which is happening every 4 years. Not only the Shura Council, even they have the local council election. This is the highest is Kuwait, 104 out of 150. Bahrain is 74. Oman is 40%, 40, which is one of the lowest, even though in Oman there is election. They have local council election every 4 years and Shura Council election every 4 years. And I've seen and witnessed, myself, I witnessed this election in Oman where, especially last year, 2019, where many people went out to vote in the election, and they have 85 candidates. So 85 members of the Shura Council in Oman. So the election in Oman somehow getting better than before. Some people can have the chance to vote, but I don't know, it's still like people think they're not having the full right for the election and full participation and political campaign for the election. This shows 40% political participation. It's not 40, sorry, 40 out of 150. In Qatar is 15% because in Qatar, no political parties. In Qatar, the election, there's a Shura Council in Qatar. It's made out of 45 members. 30 of them are elected and 15 are appointed. So there's a small number of the Shura Council of the members in Qatar. In United Arab Emirates, general election is 26 out of 150. It is, again, it's low somehow because they don't have political parties, but they do have municipal election locally. In Saudi Arabia, it is the lowest. Again, Saudi Arabia is the lowest in political participations in many aspects. See the 10 points we have: 10 constitutional, general election, political organizations, and so on and so forth, the 10 points. So let's go back to slide 7 again to see Kuwait. Kuwait, when we look at Kuwait in terms of political organizations, what is political organizations? It's the political parties. Political parties in Kuwait, they do have political parties in Kuwait. Yes, they do have. But then you talk about 47%, 47 out of 100 satisfaction and happiness and believing that we do have kind of political organizations functioning in Kuwait. And it is the highest, could be, or the second highest, because in Bahrain it's 49. Kuwait is 47, Bahrain is 49. The same thing between Kuwait and Bahrain are the only two countries in the GCC countries have political parties. So kind of 50% political participation in political organizations, in political parties. And this makes sense because you do have different types of and orientations of political parties. But if you look at Sultanate of Oman, zero political parties. Qatar, 6%. Why 6%? Qatar does not have political parties, but they do have the host. People from political factions from the world, and especially they having members from some of the Islamist parties located and working somehow, and have been hosted in Qatar. In United Arab Emirates, 0. Saudi Arabia, 0. So in fact, when you talk about political parties, you find only Kuwait and Bahrain have political organizations, and they can participate in election based on their own affiliations to political parties. Number 4 is civil society institutions. See, that's Kuwait again. Number 4, see, that's civil civil society institute. What is civil society institutions? You know, the civil society is a wide term, but again, like in civil society, this could include all the activities could be done by individuals within NGOs and other educational and civil organizations and social and cultural organizations. In Kuwait, you find civil society institutions are 58% that kind of participation in political life. They have the influence, they have the impact on political life. 58%, they work, they function, they are there. They could be mostly NGOs, non-governmental organizations. In Bahrain, it's even more than this. In Bahrain, it's about 80%. Bahrain is about 80%, 79% of the civil society have the impact on the political life, which is one of the highest. It is the highest in Gulf countries. In Oman, in the Sultanate of Oman, civil society is only 41% institution. I mean, I know well the situation in Oman because I lived there for many years. In Oman, it's the civil society, they don't have NGOs, no NGOs. But they have some bodies. Those bodies could be called institutes, like academic, social, mostly culture and heritage, such as for women, for children, for culture, for architecture. But there is nothing about politics, and nothing is, they don't even lobby, no lobbying. They cannot lobby, they cannot have any pressure on the government. They work most likely in terms of social and cultural activities. In Qatar, civil society institutions, even less, which is 24%. United Arab Emirates is 20. It's only 20% civil society because the NGOs are not able to work in most of the countries here. NGOs are perceived because they could think that NGOs working and have the impact and the influence on governments. But they don't give permissions only for a specific reason in a very limited and restricted way. Saudi Arabia, civil society institutions, 14. Again, it's the lowest, 14%. Let's go back to slide 7. Slide 7 again. We look at Kuwait, and number 5 point is gender and youth. This is the question always being asked in everywhere in the Middle East. With gender and youth, do they participate in political life? This could be one lecture for gender, and another lecture could be for youth participation in political life. It's not easy to evaluate this because always female are not unhappy, and they demand more. By the way, in Oman, Sultanate of Oman is one of the highest in the world in terms of women participation in public life, not in political life, but I'm talking about public life. 51% of public employees in Oman, female. It could be one of the highest in the world. 51% of public office employees, female in Oman. Could be one of the highest in the world. Anyway, in the Gulf in general, women taking advantage and working well, and they devote some of their time to the public office and political life. You see, out of 75, see, this is the scale 75. Scale of 75, gender balance and youth engagement of political life in Kuwait is 48 out of 75, which is one of the highest points, not only in the Gulf, it's in the world as well, 48. In Bahrain, it's more than this, it's 60. Bahrain, it's going to be one of the highest in the Middle East and in the world, 60 out of 75, which is almost like 75% of women participating in political life, which is one of the highest in the world. In Oman, Sultanate of Oman, 45, it is high. It's more than 50. It's kind of 60% of women participating in political life, women and youth, 45 out of 75. In Qatar, it's one of the highest as well. It's 58. In Qatar, you see that 58 out of 75, gender and youth. women and young people participating in political life, it's 58, scoring 58 out of 75. Same thing goes for United Arab Emirates. It is one of the highest, 66 out of 75. Saudi Arabia, it is the lowest, 30 out of 75. It's about 35% to 40% of youth and women participating in political life. Things can be changing in Saudi Arabia, by the way. We have witnessed just recently, 2020, lots of changes happened. And even if you look 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that percentage was much lower than 30% or 30 or 20. But again, like this number of youth and women, especially women, participating in political life is increasing in Saudi Arabia. Come back to the number 6, transparency. Transparency, like out of 50, Kuwait has achieved 27. Transparency, like decision making, how decision is made. How is it made? Who's making the decision? Do we have any kind of a transparency? The criteria, the process of decision making by the elites and decision makers. How about citizens of those countries? How they look at the decision making? How see them? Do we have any kind of transparency where that people know exactly what's going on, what's happening when they appoint ministers, or having agreements and covenants with different countries at the international level in terms of diplomacy and the decision for war and engagement in conflict? How citizens and people know about this? Do they have the right to understand how the process has been done and how this process, when was it, by whom? That's what we call it transparency. And so in Kuwait, it's 27. Kuwait, 27 out of 50, almost 54%. We have kind of a transparency where people know how decision is made. In Bahrain, it's 20%. It is 20. It's like, sorry, 20 out of 50 is 40%. 20 out of 50. In Oman, it's, I think, one of the lowest in Oman as well. It's 11%. That's why I'm like, I understand that Oman have one of the highest corruption in GCC countries, in the Gulf. Oman, I think Oman is number one. In terms of corruption, it is the highest. When now 2020 Sultan Haytham, the new Sultan, pledged that he will fight corruption. He's the Sultan. He knows that there's lots of corruption in the country and no transparency, and he is going to be fighting this. And he's done lots of things and understand the fact that he sacked many people in terms, not sacking them, but like people went in pension, like transferring thousands of people to early retirement, the people who served in the country for 30 years, some of them elite, some of them senior rank in the military, they have been shifted to retirement. They're not working anymore. So now the new Sultan is working towards transparency and achieving kind of the best for the country in terms of political participation. In Qatar, transparency is almost same, like it's 12%. Most people don't know how the decision is made. UAE, it is 10 out of 50. Sorry, go back to Qatar, is 12 out of 50. UAE, it's 10 out of 50 transparency. 10 out of 50. I don't know if you're following me. I know there's too much information, little details, but really important to have to understand these are credible information and up to date. This is the 2020 latest information about political participation. United Arab Emirates, it's 10 out of 50. Saudi Arabia is the lowest. It is 9. It's 9 out of 50 are knowing exactly how things are done in the country, meaning having transparency in the decisions and people are well informed. Only 9 out of 50. Go back to the Kuwait again in the slide number 7, Kuwait. Number 6 here, we can look, point number 6, number 7, freedom of opinion and expression. This is really dangerous. It's important that, when we talk about political participation, most likely we talk about expression of opinion, freedom of say, freedom of expression, freedom of opinion. We always say in the West, people can think and speak loud, and they have the right to criticize. This is happening in Turkey. It is happening in many countries in the world. But how much this is in the Gulf countries? Like, what is the percentage of people are able to criticize or express, not criticize, express their own opinion about the government and about the elites and about the head of the state? You find that in Kuwait, it's one of the highest. Kuwait is 70 out of 150. It is like it's less than 50%. It is less than 50% people are able to express their own opinion and freedom of opinion. It's less than 50%, which is 70 out of 100. And this is the highest, by the way. Kuwait is the highest. Let's look at the Bahrain. Bahrain expression of opinion is 22 out of 150, almost nothing. You cannot express yourself. You cannot say anything to criticize the elites and the governments and the king. 22 out of 150, it's almost like 15% only freedom of expression. I mean, if you take this into consideration and look at Turkey, for example, you can find 150%, because people are criticizing the prime minister and the president, and everybody. Same thing, Europe. People can could be cynical of the queen or the prime minister. But here, if you look at Bahrain, for example, it's almost nothing, that people cannot express themselves well. In Oman, expression is only 47 out of 150. It's about 33%, only 33%. We say 47 out of 150, it's almost 33%. Still like very low figure of expression of opinion. Qatar, in Qatar, you find it's 58. It's one of the highest in the Gulf, but it's less than 50%. When we talk about 50 point out of 150 point, less than 50% of ability to express themselves. You know that even when you talk about Qatar, we have Al Jazeera and other TV channels, and people are able to talk and express themselves. We have some limitations, but even this is one of the highest in the Gulf, 58 out of 150. If you look, compare United Arab Emirates, it's only 31 points out of what? 150. It means 20%. What about KSA, which is Saudi Arabia? 14%. It's less than 10. Less than 10% of the people are able to express, feeling that they're able to express themselves and criticize and have a freedom of opinion, which is one of the lowest could be one of the lowest in the world, in the whole world. Go back to the last few points on slide number 7, Kuwait again, talking about the representation of a group of minorities. What about minorities? Do we have minorities? Yes. Each country almost have some minorities. I'm not gonna go to we did talk the first week about the communities and the social level and the combination of different elements of the social aspect in the Gulf and GCC countries. We do have some minorities, even could be, we're talking about the citizens or the people of the land in those countries, where they come from. If you talk about the minorities, some countries, they cannot even express themselves. If you look at the minorities here in Kuwait, the representation of minorities, 46%. Kuwait, by the way, have a unique case. In Kuwait, they have what's called Bidun, which is a stateless. They have many people not many people, but like quite thousands of people in Kuwait are stateless, Bidun. Even though they were born in Kuwait, they live their life in Kuwait, they have been there all their life, they know nowhere else, but they are stateless. We call them Bidun. بدون meaning without nationality, meaning stateless. They live in Kuwait, they cannot manage their life well, and this is difficult, and this is against human rights and against the United Nations Convention of Human Rights and Convention on the Refugees and the Stateless as well. Many moved from Kuwait and applied for asylum in European countries and United States and other countries, and easy they can get nationality in EU countries as long as they can prove they are stateless under the Geneva Convention of the Stateless Person. They can get nationality after 5-6 years in those host countries. But in Kuwait, they cannot get anything. Freedom of opinion representation of a group and minorities. In Bahrain, 19%. Bahrain is a combination of Sunni and Shia, and this is mostly the combination. We have lots of fights and conflicts happened for the past few years. People are trying to live together, but when it comes to the government itself, it's pushing people towards the end, like not to express their own even rights. In Oman, it's one of the best. Oman, it is one of the best. I'll tell you why now. Oman, it's 82% minorities are feeling safe, feeling able to participate in political life. In Oman, it's illegal to insult somebody based on their own origins. And it's one of the highest, one of the strictest even sanctions or punishment. If you insult somebody because of their own race and ethnicity in Oman, you're going to be locked in a prison for many years, yes. Could be more than 10, 15 years even. So this is why in Oman you find people living side by side, even though people come from different origins, different ethnicities. But as long as they become Omani citizens, in this case, they are able to live and to be elected and vote in the election. They have full participation in political life. So this is why you find it's one of the highest in the point. 82% of feeling they are represented. They are voting, run for the election. They have the full right completely. But when it comes to being in the political life, 82%, which is one of the highest, could be even in the world. In Qatar is 53%. Qatar is somehow doing well as well, which is more than 50%. United Arab Emirates, it's 50-50 as well, 50% of minor, because those countries, people are combination. They don't come from the same origin. They come from different direction, but they come and live together and they work together and doing very well, in fact. In Saudi Arabia, only 20% of the minorities are represented, 20%. Why? In Saudi Arabia, you're going to find people from different ethnicities. You don't see them, not in the news, not in many research, because they're not vocal, they don't have the voice. You're not going to ask me, I don't know much about the context of the social life in Saudi Arabia, but they do have some sects. They do have some sects in Islamic sectors. They work, and some people of Muslim from different ethnicities. So we have sects and ethnicities as well. Let's go back to the point number 9. Point number 9 before the last point, which is foreign communities. Foreign communities. What is foreign community? Participation in political life. When you talk about foreign community, like I am living, say, in Oman, as a non-citizen, we call them expats, expatriates. In Arabic, they call them al-wafidin, al-wafid, meaning expats, expatriate, the foreigners. Though in Kuwait, they don't have much rights. I mean, we talk about the stability, like what would happen if somebody who is working for whatever minister or company in the Gulf is sacked from his job. No security, most likely. He'll be deported almost immediately. You don't have much rights. Now, not exactly the same situation from one country to another is not the same. If you look out of 75% points, out of 75 points in Kuwait, 29 scoring 29 out of 75 points, feeling secure and able to work and to have stability and security as foreigners in Kuwait. In Bahrain, it's one of the highest. It's 60%. You see, in many European countries, for example, it is one of the best in Europe. With expats, foreigners, if you're not working anymore, you have the right to apply for, like, could be for another job, or you're not going to be deported easily unless if you breach the legal system. It's not easy. Like, everything could be there based on the legal system and giving you your human rights there available. Like, everything is based on the legal system. In Bahrain, it's one of the best. 60%, 60 out of 75 points, foreign communities are feeling safe and politically participating in the whole system. In Sultanate of Oman, it is somehow high, 52 out of 75. It is high, but I feel like I've seen many cases people were deported, not deported, but they were asked to leave. They were asked to leave the country when their own visa expired, or they could not find another way, or they could not, because sometimes even they cannot be represented. They cannot be vocal. They cannot express themselves to criticize the government. They cannot do so. In Qatar, in state of Qatar, it is 35%, almost half, almost 50%. It's low. Same thing, like it's lower than other countries. But in United Arab Emirates, 40 out of 75. Saudi Arabia, 17 out of 75. Some people have been expelled, deported, not feeling safe. They cannot participate in political life. Last point, sorry, I'm taking much of the time today, but I'm even enjoying this. Maybe you're enjoying it. If you focus much with me, you're going to be enjoying this kind of statistics and points, and to look at political participation based on logical points and scientific elements. Last point, assuming leadership and sensitive positions. Assuming leadership and sensitive position, meaning anybody can take a high position in the government. You could be a minister, prime minister, ambassador, these kind of high ranks. You could be high rank in the military. And when we talk especially about the political life, we talk about ministerial level and diplomatic level. Okay, now in Kuwait, 70 out of 150 scoring. That meaning, what does it mean exactly? It means does anybody in the community can, or have the chance, anyone have the chance to become a minister? Almost the fraction is 70 out of 150, which is less than 50%. Not everybody. If I become a Kuwaiti citizen or an Omani citizen or Qatar citizen, I have very little chance to become minister or ambassador. If I come from a certain family or tribe, I might not have the chance. If I come from certain ethnicity, even a citizen, I'm talking about citizen, you could be sometimes even from the elites families or from the elites. So only 70 out of 150 in Kuwait having the assumption of becoming leaders in sensitive positions. And this is one of the highest as well in Kuwait, by the way. In Bahrain, no, it's only 40%. Why 40%? Meaning most of the sensitive position giving to the royal family, somebody from the royal family or the close family in the country. Oman, it's one of the highest, 105 out of 150 that people have the chance. So I've seen this well in Oman for the past few years. Many of the ministers are not connected with the royal family. Many of them. Many of the senior people who work for the government come from simple family, from different ethnicities. Qatar is the highest. Qatar is number one. Qatar is number one in the Gulf, GCC countries. The assumption of leadership and sensitive position, 120 out of 50. Let me just see. Hold on a second. Just somebody's looking. Sorry. All right. So Qatar is getting the highest point, 120 out of 150, meaning we have variety of people. It's not limited. It's not limited to the royal family. It's not the emir of the country and his family, but the chances are given to many people from different directions, from citizens from different families are able to participate and take part in sensitive positions such as ministers, prime minister, ambassadors, senior level. They could be from anyone in the community. In United Arab Emirates, it's one of the lowest, it's 55 after 150. In Saudi Arabia is astonishingly, for me, this is the highest. It is 65 out of 150. It's the highest in terms of within the 10 elements. You can see those 10 elements. Within the 10 elements from constitutional life to assumption of leadership and sensitive position, the highest in Saudi Arabia is assuming sensitive position. It's 65%, 65 out of 150. It's kind of there's been some kind of diversity, choosing people not from the royal, outside the royal family to assume high positions in the government. I'm finished, yes, I am finished with these points. I'm going to open the floor for discussion. We're not going to be long because I think and I assume these points are really clear. You can have the slides, look at them. I can't send the whole file. The file you can log in for the political participation index in the Gulf states in the Gulf House Institute, Gulf House, www.gulfhouse.org. You're going to find full report, 35 pages. 35 pages, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. You're going to enjoy it so much when you look at it because lots of details, information, somebody who's not familiar with the situation in GCC countries, you're going to know much about this. Thank you very much, and let's open the floor for any question. Dr. Ahmed?
Yes, Professor.
If you have any question, if anything is written or somebody would ask, you can take them now.
Dear participants, if you have a question, please use the raise hand button or write your questions through the Q&A session.
Shall I exit the page, the stop sharing, or do you want to see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
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 Yes, we have one audience, Abdurrahman Mohammed Maulana.
Okay, can you speak up, Abdurrahman?
Go ahead, Abdurrahman.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, sir.
Can you speak up? Sorry.
Yeah. Do you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Okay. I think it is good. It is good day for this last session, and I was very enjoyed the last session of political participants in the GCC. But I have a question about the political parties in the GCC countries because of how do we say the GCC countries are still a monarchies. They are constitutional monarchies, and sometimes UAE is the first countries that they are function like a federal system. They are Emiratis. Say how do we say they are full political participants in the UAE? We know that when we are talking about the political parties in the world, there are some functions, there are some duties. Can we say the political parties in the UAE as a ceremonial? Like, what about instead of we saying a full function, they are only like ceremonial functions?
Thank you, Abdurrahman. You look at again. First point, when you look at the GCC countries, the only two countries practically having political parties are Kuwait and Bahrain. Other countries, they don't have political parties. That's number one. Number two, the system in GCC countries are monarchy. All of them have monarchic system, and it's absolute monarchy. Well, again, like if you would like to examine absolute monarchy, it's it's not strictly absolute monarchy, because when you talk about election for the local council and for the Shura Council, then it becomes not really exactly strict absolute monarchy. Yes, it is moving somehow, shifting, but it's slowly towards constitutional monarchy. It's still like it depends on each country. Let's say in Kuwait, for example, people getting more chance to participate in political life more than other countries. What I said before, we have satisfaction of more than 50% of people of Kuwait in terms of political participation, and because they have political parties, they have elections, they have the impact upon the decision-making process and transparency and so on and so forth. But this is not the situation in UAE. It's not the situation in Saudi Arabia. But when you talk about UAE, it's a federal system. UAE is not. It's monarchy, but it's mini monarchy. It is you have a monarchy within a monarchy, within a monarchy in UAE, where it's still functioning based on the same idea exactly in other countries. Whatever you call it, could be a king or sultan or emir, right? But it is the same criteria of when you talk about hereditary, how people are coming to power. There's the head of state. They're not elected, they're not selected. It depends on the heritage from the same dynasties, from the same family. This is the situation again in UAE. Even though that we have each monarch, you go back to the past. I mean, Abdurrahman, to understand the complication of UAE and other countries in the Gulf, you go back to the past, and each state in UAE was somehow independent until they were functioning independently with a sheikh who's the head of that state, and the sheikh comes from the same dynasty. But until 1970, where we have the independence of UAE, becoming a country where we have a federation where every state have its own way, but working together as one country. It is one country anyway. So you cannot rule out this could be a step towards kind of changing the system, and a new federation could be coming based off changes which can be somehow different from other Gulf countries. It's not, it's the same thing, with the monarchy within a monarchy. Thank you, Abdurrahman. Anyone else? Anybody? We have in the chat box some questions.
If anyone will not ask a question, actually, I have a question for you, Professor.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, it can be said that the Kuwait has the most democratic system in the GCC countries. And as we all know that they had a parliamentary election at the beginning of December. And when we look at the results of these elections, it can be said that the opposition gained a much ground if you compare to 2016 elections. So how do you see the political life or functionality of the parliamentary in Kuwait? Could you elaborate on this point, please?
I think, thank you, Dr. Ahmed. I think Kuwait is one of the best systems they have, not only in the Gulf, but in the Middle East. It is one of the best. You have a freedom of expression is one of the highest. You have political participations in all aspects and points I mentioned, whether they start from the constitution to the positions. When you talk about the election, they have political parties and they have opposition. I think it's the only country they have opposition in the Gulf, and the opposition able to function and to work and to express themselves. And they're very organized people. And you've seen with the normalization between some of the Gulf countries and Israel, Kuwait was against this. And we've seen outspoken people speaking loudly against the normalization with Israel. And so that in Kuwait, you have the freedom of expression. By the way, Kuwait is one of the countries has been always having kind of lots of developments. It's one of the countries where we have early development before any country else, any other country in the Gulf. So the democracy and political participation was in Kuwait before any other country in the GCC. This is why they have a long way of developments until they get to this point in terms of freedom of expression. Something else influenced Kuwait is 1990, after the invasion of Kuwait. 1990, after Iraq invasion of Kuwait and the liberation of Kuwait by United States and some Arab countries, that's have an influence, a strong influence on the political life in Kuwait, where people now change in terms of mentality and political attitude and cultural attitude. Lots of changes. Openness in the society was not the same like before 1990. So that gave people the chance to think and to travel and to go everywhere, States and Europe, and they have lots of ideas, lots of changes. Now that gave a space of freedom. The people of Kuwait are able to express themselves in general. Now that gave and opened up the space of everybody to participate in political life. And that was somehow secular approach, most likely, until the past 10 years or almost the last decade, we have witnessed the opposition, the Islamist parties in Kuwait, which is unique. They say again, like in Egypt, for example, they cannot function well. They cannot even, in Egypt, are not allowed to function, not to work. In Kuwait, they work, they function, they vote, they have political parties, and the outspoken of different ideas. So Kuwait have the upper hand, and we can salute it in its way of dealing with many issues in the Middle East in terms of political aspects. Again, so that kind of a freedom gave people the chance to think in different directions, not only secular, not only nationalists, but open up for a new young generations who have been influenced by Islamists in the Middle East in general, and they have their own thought and ways and having their own political parties. And this is why you have even the Kuwaiti society, even though it's very open society in terms of dealing with the social, cultural aspects and even the influence of American and European culture. Even with this kind of openness, you find Kuwait is one of the conservative societies. Yes, it is a conservative society. You have mosques and people stick much to their own teaching and preaching of Islamic values. And this is why you find a new young generations who really stick to the Islamic values. And this is why we can understand, we have those political parties opposition to the emir of the state and who are able to win the election. I think the experience of Kuwait could be changed, could be shifted to other Gulf countries in the future. It's going to take time. But it's one of the best. It is one of the best ways and mechanisms and freedom of expressions. And I think this is constitutional monarchy in Kuwait is opening up to change to become constitutional monarchy. It's going to be shifting from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy with the time. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed.
Thank you, Professor, for your response. Abdurrahim, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Alaikum salam.
Do you hear me, sir?
Yes, Abdurrahim.
Sir, I have got a very simple question. You being the a politician plus a professor in the political department, which system do you support? Monarchy system, which is better for the country's development or a state's development, or democracy?
This is not a difficult question. In fact, each country have its own way. It depends on the situation in the country. Democracy does not suit every country, by the way. We don't have to copy and paste what we have in the West. What democracy means, we have, before we talk about democracy or monarchy, to understand what is democracy. Democracy, the freedom of expression, that people can able to speak out, is that this is the way and this is the point. So if this is the way, I think in monarchic system, we have constitutional monarchy. I prefer constitutional monarchy. At United Kingdom, UK is a constitutional monarchy. See the Queen, and they have a Prime Minister. So you can have a combinations between the head of the state as the king or the queen or the emir, and the chance for the people who can fully participate in the political system. But when we talk about political parties, I am with political parties with a minimal number of political parties. Because if you look at some countries, such as in Iraq, for example, in Iraq, they have more than 100 political parties. What did they do for the country? Not much, really. Sometimes the competition for the position, not to serve the community. We have to look at the best system. We can invest much in political parties who can represent the community, competing for serving the community. Now, we cannot say, well, this is specific political system can fit for that country, because democracy is good in terms of giving people the chance, but democracy with specific rules and regulations, not to widen it. And see, if you look at some European countries, they have, I mean, I'm a committed Muslim myself. I'm against gay and lesbians who have their own now becoming vocal and have their own voice, and they have to influence the system, like what happened in European countries. This is why we should not copy, because every political system have to respond to the need of the society. In a Muslim society, not the same like even in a Christianity. They have some reservations and restrictions. So we have to be careful. Monarchy cannot be really bad if we have what we call some rules, a legal system, and constitutional. It is constitutional monarchy.
Thank you, sir.
Any last two questions?
We have also questions in the Q&A session. Fatima Rai asks that the UAE and KSA want Yemen to become a federal country. What do you think about that?
Can you say that again? I cannot hear you well.
United Arab Emirates and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia want Yemen to become a federal country. What do you think about that? Ask Fatima.
I think this is an issue of Yemen, not Saudi Arabia or UAE. This is not up to them. The people of Yemen can decide. Look at Sudan, for example. Sudan, years ago, they voted on dividing the country between Sudan and South of Sudan. It becomes two countries, separate. Now, if you were talking about the Federation of Yemen, based on what? Yemen is one country, and we had in the past South and North of Yemen, and it was again becomes one unity, one country. Now we have the division because of the conflict. Now, if we talk about federation, meaning that we have Sunni and Shia, whatever like we call them, sectarian or ethnicities, this would weaken the country. Because when you talk about, when the question is about like federation, I assume it's federation based on ethnicity or sectarianism. And this is against the unity of the country. This is against any possibility of having to work together. Even this can be a division in another way. Look, Oman, for example, Sultanate of Oman, you have three main sects. The main sect is Ibadism, then Sunni and Shia. But how they live? They live side by side, one community, strong together, one nationality, and no conflict. And we have a legal system, a strict legal system, to everybody can work in based on that legal system. So I think the division of Yemen and making a federation, this would weaken the country, and this would satisfy the desire of outside countries who want to divide Yemen. But this is not accepted by the Yemeni people even. Now, Reham is asking a question here about, she's asking how can we talk about the political participation in the region without mentioning the political prisoners in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain, even Kuwait opposition? Yes, I agree with you, Reham. You have political opposition. What I say, if you look back to the political participation and satisfaction of people, none of those countries have achieved even 90% to 80%. I mean, in general, when you talk about the highest number is Kuwait, 535 points have achieved. So again, like we still lagging behind. Those, especially Saudi Arabia, have achieved, not have achieved, little. In terms of political participation, you have, or like it is the lowest, could be the lowest country in the world. Opposition is one of the issues. Imprisonment of opposition, that is a case in many of them, locked in cells in Saudi Arabia. We've seen some of the royal families. We've seen this example a few years ago, where some of the royal family members were locked in cells because of different reasons, especially because of the constitute threat for the MBS. What I mean by the MBS of the Mohammed bin Salman. So this is why I think it is a point. Thank you, Rehan, for raising this point. Again, this reflects the lowest part of political participation, especially in Saudi Arabia, by the communities and the opposition. Of course, this is an issue have to be tackled strongly by the international community, by human rights organizations, and by United Nations. We have seen the Human Rights Council. We have seen some of the human rights activists who are criticizing Saudi Arabia and other countries who block the opposition. We have seen the case of Khashoggi anyway. It's not about imprisonment, killing people even. And we have seen the reaction of the international community. Thank you, Rehan. Anyone else? We can take a last question or two questions if you want. No?
And
if no,
I can take your last words for this webinar series. On my part, it's been a pleasure to be with you during these sessions. And on behalf of ORSAM, I would like to convey our deepest thanks to you for your contribution and knowledge and time you have spent for this webinar series. And if you have a few words, I can take it now.
Okay. I would like to thank you, Mr. Ahmed, for the time and communications and the effort you have done through the past 8 weeks. And I would like to thank ORSAM and everybody in ORSAM, I think Dr. Ismail, Dr. Ahmed in ORSAM. Mm-hmm. And I would like to thank all the participants. Some of them have been active participants asking the questions. I can see in the screen we have Rehan, Abdul Rahim, Abdul Rahman, and there was somebody last like I mean some of the, I cannot remember all names, but what I can see on the screen now. I would like to thank everybody in these past 8 weeks, and I'm sorry if I missed any points. I'm doing my best. I'm trying to achieve the best. I think we have done really well, and I would wish we can meet sometimes in Turkey. It could be in Istanbul or Ankara or somewhere else. If and once the pandemic, the COVID-19 is over, hopefully we can arrange something. Any one of you can meet in Istanbul. We can meet together and have a session face-to-face, and we can talk. It would be a really good chance. I'm going to be there in the summer. I will be in the summer spending my time most likely with the family in Turkey. And I would love to see any one of you. You have my contact from Dr. Ahmed. If you would like to contact me for anything, I'm still in Doha now for the past 2 weeks. And I'm doing well. Things are fine. And I hope that everybody of you would achieve the best And I advise you, if you would like to invest much on the Gulf studies, there's an area where you can write, you can study. Gulf studies is important. These countries are really important for the political changes happening for the past few years in the Middle East, the locations, the oil, the political economy. You can do a lot. You can work in the Gulf studies, and I'm hoping that to see some of you maybe in the Gulf or in Turkey. Thank you, and Assalamu alaikum.